Hello and welcome back to another Pickled Unscripted. As always, I have the drunk Matt, the Pickled Dragon, and I am Dracoya. Matt, what are you drinking today?
Well, this is interesting because I was very surprised. I don't normally like blended malt Scotch whiskey,
Yeah?
but I was looking for something inexpensive, and my wife went to the store and she grabbed me. Well, I should say we're going on a Highland journey. And my Scottish friend would say, "You got malt blended Scotch? That's like chicken nuggets, just all mixed up together and ground up." Well, this bottle of chicken nuggets is pretty good, actually. I
Yeah.
was just amazed, but the Highland Journey, I don't even know that they distill it themselves. I think they're just a bottler, but um, yeah, I mean, I guess it's everybody else's leftover dregs and all mixed together. I'll take it.
Well, hey, your wife is just on a roll the last couple of
I
weeks.
know. She actually got me a
Man.
couple bottles.
Oh, wow. You really, wow. Just
Everyone
keep it
needs
there.
a good wife like that.
I know. I'm trying. Anyway, we have a super fun video for you today. We wanted to have a follow-up from our last video about Christianity and Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. This is very cool. I didn't even know this existed until we were like reading up on a few things and popped on our radar. But this is a Christian defense of Dungeons and Dragons, which I find to be super cool.
Yeah,
Um,
it,
so yeah, this article is easy to find. If you just do a Google search for Christian defense of Dungeons and Dragons, you'll find it and you can read it
but
and
we can also put it in the description below.
I will try to remember. I'll try. But it is an interesting article. So let me where did it go? There. All right. There it is. From Love Thy Nerd, Love Nerds, Engage Culture, Build Community.
Now, one thing I want to point out before we hop in too far into this article is that this was written in 2019. And the other one, which is a Christian's Response, that was very anti Dungeons and Dragons, was written in 1987. So very different worlds.
Different time frames, and I think this author acknowledges that. But I will say that having gamed for a long, long time since the early days, um, that I've known plenty of Christians who played and played clandestinely, if I'm saying that correctly. Uh, but so I think that the early people I played with and had experiences with, this person, the author of this, Phil, I think can relate because one of the things that he says right away is that writing this article is going to cause problems for him.
Yeah.
So the attitudes among the really staunch Christian community may not have changed all that much. And I think in the last video, I even commented having moved to the Deep South and the Bible Belt and all that, and
Mhm.
having experienced talking to game store owners, that it's still, the religious fervor against RPGs, in particular
I would
Dungeons and
I,
Dragons.
I would say that in the Deep South, I mean, I know that I have personally met a lot of groups that are very anti Harry Potter, for example, for reasons. But I do think that there seems to be more staunch Christians against D&D than there is something like Harry Potter.
Yeah, yes, and that all comes up in this article. I mean, he makes some good points. The first half of the article is a lot of it sets up. He talks about
Backstory.
his own personal group and like the history. And everybody knows of the stories, I think, and we're gonna like blast past that because I think
We'll do another video on the history of how this whole thing kind of came about.
yeah, so we're not really too interested in that bit because it's rehashing not just the history, but a lot of stuff we talked about in the last video. But
Right.
he does set it up where he talks about his group and how there are many people in his group who do have to keep gaming a secret. And again, 2019. D&D is in mainstream. It's in movies and television and Netflix and Stranger Things and toys and it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And but he relates a number of stories, a number of examples where even today in workplaces that he's worked in, and of course he's working in places that are religious centers, right? So we do have to consider that, but he does have to keep that a secret that his time playing the game is is something that is taboo even today. Again, he goes through the history, talks about the steam tunnels under the college and James Egbert the third, the very introverted player. There he is. He was famously the this college student that disappeared and everyone thought in a wave of suicides where people were taking their lives and the media was blaming it on Dungeons and Dragons. The fact that he was a game player, well, obviously this has to do with Dungeons and Dragons. And there was this guy, he was a private investigator, but gosh, this guy was a piece of work. William Deere. I've seen a number of things about this guy over the years, and he was hired to go find James. And this guy, William Deere, was convinced that Dungeons and Dragons was the source of the problem. In fact, his quote, there's a quote in here from him. In some instances, when a person plays the game, you actually leave your body and go out of your mind. I mean,
Man,
this
I want
guy,
to play that game.
yeah. And from all of these news stories, subsequent other kids that took their own lives, there was organizations like Bothered by Dungeons and Dragons that were
We'll
uh
get into it in another video.
yeah, the Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, I think it was called. But in any case, they were formed to oppose the game. And ironically, James Egbert, he turned up later. He had he was a gifted student, rushed through school. So I think he was like 15, 16 when he hit college, and he was a computer whiz, and the pressure got to him and he just took off.
Well, he's a
Um,
teenage boy.
yeah, I mean, it's tough, like a lot of
Ah,
pressure put on those kids. So, um, but in any case, I think what's interesting is that the author of the article, he goes into not just the history, but he goes through and he acknowledges all of the issues that Christians have with Dungeons and Dragons, like, summoning demons and parlaying with devils and whatnot. That's all
joining
explicitly
covens.
forbidden. Uh, but he also says, I don't much care for that stuff myself. Um, but he does, and I think it's kind of coming up here. He does cite kind of the hypocrisy in the modern day church where they'll say Harry Potter, Magic the Gathering, these things, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, these things are all okay, you know?
A
Uh,
lot of them don't say they're okay, but yes.
yeah, I mean, like if you've ever seen, I recommend a documentary called Christian Camp. No, Jesus Camp, not Christian Camp. It was called Jesus Camp. And in there, you got some people who are really, really extreme. So it's an
Yeah,
interesting,
I know. I went
interesting.
to those camps as a kid.
Oh, good
Super.
Lord.
Yeah, good Lord is right.
Well, so, he does go through so he starts out with all of the history and the problems that Christians say they have with the game. And then he starts going into, okay, well, why are these things okay, but not D&D or not role-playing games? Um, and then following that, he starts going into the mechanics of the game. He mentions that like swinging a sword is no different than casting a spell because you're not doing a chant, you're not putting down any kind of ritual candles or anything. It's a
Right.
mechanic of the game. And so it's kind of like you're attributing way more to the game than what's actually happening. The players are actually, participating in. Um, and I am not like a biblical scholar, biblical person by any stretch of the imagination, but and so, maybe somebody out there has a different interpretation of this quote than what this author prescribes to it. But he says in Romans 14:3 might be adapted to fit here. One who does not play must not judge the one who does. So I don't know. I don't know if that's out of context or not. Maybe one of
It's
you
out of
guys out there could
context,
tell us.
but
But I
we'll.
thought the author thought it was interesting, right? So I don't know. Um, and one of my issues I have with this article is that the author does jump around a lot. So like it feels like he's building his argument, and then he's like, oh, but by the way, I want to go back and rehash something else up here.
Well, I don't think that our author is a professional journalist or scientist where he would write these types of papers very much. And I think he's also very nervous about writing this article at all. And it shows in how he's jumping around from point to point.
That is an excellent observation.
Thank you.
I have to say, because he does say that the game allows players to play evil. Um, and there are many dark um character options. You can play a warlock who signs a pact with a devil or demon or whatever. And that would be something that he does not allow in his game. And that is something that I personally find um, to be one of the greatest strengths of role-playing games is that a group can decide to use any rules or not use any rules or change the rules as they see fit. So cool. And I think that was something Gary Gygax always said, like he was quoted and this is not exact quote. This is just kind of um, you know, paraphrasing here, but he said that it would be very disappointing if everybody across the country were playing the exact same way, exact same rules. He wanted every group, every table to have their own niche and be unique. And the rules were set up to be, as such, which I love that idea, you
I
know.
do too.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, this author, he uses the example of, Monopoly encourages players to drive others out of business. Risk, Axis and Allies, Axis and Allies, Dracoya.
Our favorite game. Our
Yeah,
favorite game.
we've been playing a lot of Axis and Allies online.
Yeah,
So
we have. A
yeah,
lot.
so but in any case, these games all promote the crushing of your opponent. Who in those cases, and he doesn't really point this out, but who in those cases is a real life person? Whereas Dungeons and Dragons is a collaborative game
Hmm.
where we are all working together to in a common cause, you know?
I think that's
I,
one of the things that I like the most about combat in Dungeons and Dragons is the collaborative effort. And it reminds me very much of Tolkien and how you would rescue, he had all the characters rescue each other, not necessarily themselves. And that's one of the biggest problems I do have with the new 5e is that everyone and their sister cousin has a freaking healing spell. And back in the day, that wasn't the case. And yeah, it meant that you had to be a little bit more tactful, but it also meant you had to be more present. You had to be more careful of what your team was capable of. And I don't know, you really had to rely more on your team in order to succeed, which I think is beautiful.
I 100%, 110% even agree. Um, yeah, and you know, there was a section in here, and I think this might be the paragraph, where
Hmm.
he made a point that I think I knew, but I didn't, it wasn't like something that like I consciously
Worded it
really
well.
thought about. But that is the reason he disliked the sinister. I'll just read it to you. The reason I dislike the more sinister character options is because I think they tend to erode the imaginative integrity of the role play. Why, after all, would a fiendish warlock really get along with a nobly motivated hero? Uh, the edgy character choices tend to attract players looking for more complexity in their character, but rarely follow through on the implications that should naturally follow. Which is a really good point. I really like that. And it's part of the reason I ask people to use alignment because I'm not a real strict stickler on alignment, but if you've got a character option or if you're trying to play a character that's outside of your normal um, personality, over time, especially in a long campaign, we tend to get away from what we thought we were going to be playing, and we start falling into the same, you know, routines that we always play, as. Whereas if you have something like alignment, you're like, oh, I'm meant to be, lawful neutral, super organized with a code and an ethos, and it's not an end all be all, but it is a kind of a, a
Helpful
clue,
reminder,
yeah, a helpful
helpful
reminder.
guide, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, this is really cool. He does go into the polytheistic universe of Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's funny. He calls it a dog's breakfast of invented D&D deities. I think it's hilarious. I've never heard that before. A dog's breakfast. But
Yeah,
I
neither have
immediately
I.
think of all of my dogs like just plowing through whatever food is put in front of them. Yeah, so that's like a great analogy there. But and obviously that's the polytheistic universe is antithetical to the Christian one. But it's again, here's another example of the author jumping around a bit as here's another example of what Christians don't like. But um it leads into a very interesting point here that he makes. He says, in a role-playing game, there's nothing stopping players from acting as like murder hobos, thugs, or whatever. And there's nothing stopping a DM from making the goal of the campaign to, uh, hoist up some devil, right?
True.
But here's the quote that a quote that I haven't seen before. Abuse does not cancel out good use. So, you know, his table is all about the heroic. And honestly, mine is too. Like I often try to like push players. I shouldn't say push, but I offer
Guide.
opportunities for players to be heroic, to do the right thing, and I'm happy to say that in every case I've done that. My players have stepped up and been like, this is just the right thing to do. Um,
Yeah,
and
not for me.
oh, you are also, you wanted to open a tap dance
Oh,
studio.
I'm not talking about me playing with you at your game. Because yeah, no, Lizzie the tap dancing lizard that had no feet. She was great. But no, I'm talking about me as a DM. Like I would present my players with conflicting opportunities to be good. And honestly, maybe it's just the players I pick, but most of the time they would just turn murder hobo. And I was like, really? I mean, I spent so much time on this lovely character who was just, there as a good person. Like they were good people, and they've done nothing to you, and you just go around killing them. Okay, yeah, that sounds right. All right, cool.
I when I think I went through, and I think everybody evolves when they're a dungeon master. Early on, your first DMing experiences are oftentimes ones where you are kind of just like, deer in the headlights, just like very nervous about providing a great experience for your players.
That's true. I was
Um,
so scared on my first one.
yeah, I mean, and then you start, and as you get more comfortable, you begin finding your feet, and I truly believe that most DMs or GMs, depending on the game system you're with, GMs are influenced heavily by movies and entertainment. I know I was, like I saw Beastmaster and I saw Dragon Slayer as a young kid. I'm like, man, we need more dragons in our game, or we need more, whatever. But we get heavily influenced by these things, even if we don't take those themes and put them in our game. Meaning, I saw Dragon Slayer, so the party needs to kill a dragon. Uh,
Sure.
but just the idea of doing something selfless and heroic, you want to see your players do that. And I think that it's easy to be a villain. And I think it says a lot about your players. Like I oftentimes talk about my friend Jason, who always wanted to be a pacifist because
Yeah.
he just could not wrap his head around the idea of hurting people, abhorred the idea of hurting anyone, even if they weren't a real person. And so how much does that say about him as a person? And if you have players who are just willing to willy-nilly murder and ravage across the landscape, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person, but
Yeah.
you have to think twice about like the next time you need a little help from somebody, is that the person you want to call?
They clearly have some things that they should figure out with their therapist. I am not a registered therapist, but there might be some trauma there that they should explore.
Maybe, yes. So I mean we've been kind of like slow walking ourselves through the article.
As we
Um,
do.
but yes. But he starts to finally get into some of the benefits of role-playing games in general, not just Dungeons and Dragons. And I think he relates it back to the modern age, where parents are so concerned about getting their kids out from behind consoles and screens and, kind of getting away from the social isolation that so many people are experiencing these days, and how role-playing games can benefit those people and benefit parents who are trying to teach their kids, um, that human interaction uh, is is an intrinsic good, I think is in my opinion what he was trying to say. Um,
Well,
but I don't know if you
I like how he put it that Dungeons and Dragons seems to have the ability to summon friends together.
that's awesome. Yes. Games offer interactivity, and can create unique, these are quotes from him, can create unique artistic experiences. TTRPGs allow the players to collaborate with each other and the game master to create a shared story that never could have existed without the particular talents of everyone at the table. Which that is a very cool thing about role-playing games. And I think I've said that myself in the past, not necessarily on this channel, but talking to people about how I've run the same game world since the 80s. And the history, like when I introduce my game world to players today, the history of that game world has been built by my high school group and my college group and on through the decades that went on. And that is creates a much more rich history than if I were to just like cold sit down and try to write a history for this world. Because that's just like my perspective, right? It's not the perspective of the dozens of people that were at my table over the many, many years, over 45 years, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's an incredible. Um, well,
Have some more whiskey.
now I'm dry.
Ah.
Um, an incredible aspect of gaming that you won't get anywhere else. But that gets into something I was talking to you earlier about, and there was two quotes that I find to be very cool. All right, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. First one was from Tolkien, and
Oh.
this one, I think would really speak. Like if you were trying to convince a Christian, hey, role-playing games aren't that bad. In fact, they're actually an extraordinarily effective use of your time, but Tolkien said, humans reflect the nature of our creator when we create our own little world. So, they're always saying you should only emulate Christ and God, walk in their paths, right? We've heard that in that last video, right? And what Tolkien is saying is that when we are able to create our own little worlds, we are being godlike, like Christ-like, and like showing off our reverence for creation, right? And some people might disagree with the author's interpretation of that line, but I like it, so I'm going with it. Um,
All right.
And the second quote, we'll scroll on down here to C.S. Lewis. And he was talking about the calming the fears that fairy stories will detach readers from important realities, like will separate people from the Bible and God and all that stuff. So it's just the first couple sentences here. There is something ludicrous in the idea of so educating a generation which is born to the atomic bomb, since it is so likely that will meet cruel enemies. Let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. That's awesome, you know? And that is
Yeah.
like totally what I encourage at my game table is like for my players to be heroes, period. So I don't know. What do you think, Trakoya?
No, I completely agree. I think that Dungeons and Dragons is a great tool. I know that it allowed me to grow in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I'm sure that I'm not alone.
Yeah, and he makes one of the last points he makes is that, the church or certain churches, their response to Dungeons and Dragons is basically an embargo. No, you can't do this. But
No, yeah, but they do that with a lot of things.
yeah, but we're talking about the good stuff here, the D&D. But he points out that, the answer to something you don't like isn't, no culture. The answer is, you know, turning it into something that's a positive, and so he points out that his players are about heroism, being noble, being kind, And that starts with the DM and creating that sort of game. So
Yeah. And also what kind of group the DM has chosen to put together. Clearly,
exactly.
I've chosen a group of sociopaths, so.
Good times. I'm very lucky. My group has always been um and it's funny because people will create a character and they oftentimes there are so many people I know that create chaotic neutral characters because they think, well, it'll give them the option later of doing something unscrupulous if they want to. It's like a hedge. But in the end, that I have yet to meet somebody who takes advantage of that. And it's why I always say that chaotic neutral is one of the hardest classes to play or alignments to play, I should say.
You should come play with me.
I've already played with you.
Well, with me as a DM
Oh,
and a
okay.
group of sociopaths.
That would be interesting. Are you going to encourage bad behavior as a DM?
I tend to let my players explore whatever it is they'd like to explore, and most of the time they don't choose good. So, okay,
Man,
I give them the option.
man, I tell you what do you guys think of a Christian defense of Dungeons and Dragons? It's kind of refreshing, kind of an interesting read. Again, the first half of it you could probably skim, but the second half's really interesting. I liked the article. So, but
All right. Well, guys, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and go to dracoya.com for any paints and miniatures that your heart and your table might require.
and brushes.
And brushes. That's dracoya.com. And as always, guys, come back and have another round on us.